Captain Elias Vos leaned over the console, his fingers dancing across the control panel of the Intrepid as the hum of the ship's engines vibrated beneath his boots. The stars outside the observation window were as endless as they were cold, and the vastness of space seemed more suffocating than ever. He'd been on missions before, exploring new worlds, negotiating with alien races, and unearthing forgotten relics of the past. But this signal was different. It was old, ancient, and yet oddly familiar, like a whisper from a long-forgotten dream. It had come in through the ship's communication systems a few days ago, nothing more than a burst of static at first, but then a pattern emerged, an unmistakable rhythm buried beneath the noise. After hours of analyzing the signal, the crew had uncovered a cryptic message, spoken in a language that was almost like an echo of something they should know, but couldn't quite place. A distress call, originating from a planet that hadn't been charted in over 300 years. A planet that, according to all known records, shouldn't even exist. Voss rubbed his jaw, deep in thought, as he stared at the readout on the screen. "Lieutenant, any idea how this signal got past the usual galactic scanners?" Lieutenant Mira Jensen, the ship's communications officer, looked up from her console, her brow furrowed as she ran another diagnostic scan. "I've never seen anything like it, Captain. It's almost as if the signal is masking itself, somehow blending into the surrounding noise of deep space." Voss didn't like the sound of that. In his experience, when something was deliberately hidden, there was usually a very good reason for it. "Keep me updated," he said, his voice low. "I want every scrap of data we can find on this." Turning on his heel, he made his way to the bridge's observation deck, his mind already racing through the possibilities. The galaxy had its share of dead worlds, places where civilizations had risen and fallen, leaving nothing behind but ruins and forgotten stories. But this planet, if it even existed, was different. There was something about it that nagged at the back of his mind, something that felt like a thread waiting to be pulled. Hours later, the Intrepid had arrived at its destination, a small, rocky planet on the edge of an uncharted star system. The surface was dark and barren, shrouded by clouds of dust that blocked any view of the surface from orbit. As the ship descended into the atmosphere, Vos couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. "Prepare for landing," he ordered, taking his seat at the command chair. "All crew members, remain on alert. We don't know what we're walking into." As the Intrepid touched down on the planet's surface, the ground trembled slightly, sending a ripple through the ship's hull. The landing bay doors opened, and the team suited up, preparing for their first steps onto the planet's soil. The moment they stepped outside, the air was thick with an unsettling silence. No wildlife, no sounds, nothing. Only the wind whispered across the jagged, rocky landscape, carrying with it the scent of something ancient, something long forgotten. "Stay sharp," Vos muttered to his crew. "We don't know who, or what, might be waiting for us." They began their trek toward the coordinates pinpointed by the signal, the eerie silence pressing in on them as they moved deeper into the forgotten world. There, buried beneath layers of dust and time, was the first hint of something far greater than they could have imagined. The team moved cautiously across the barren landscape, their boots kicking up clouds of dust with each step. The atmosphere was thin, barely breathable, and the planet's sky was perpetually shrouded in a dull gray mist, casting everything in an eerie, muted light. The ground was cracked and uneven, marked by strange, unnatural formations, what looked like remnants of a structure long abandoned. As they drew closer to the coordinates, a massive silhouette began to take shape on the horizon. It wasn't a natural formation, it was a structure, ancient and colossal, yet oddly well preserved. A city, or what was left of one, buried beneath centuries of dust and rubble. Towering spires, jagged and half-collapsed, rose from the earth like the skeletal remains of some forgotten civilization. Vos stopped, his breath catching in his throat. He had seen many ruins in his time, but this was different. This was something far older than anything humanity had ever encountered. "We found it," Lieutenant Jensen murmured, voice laced with awe. Vos nodded, the weight of the discovery pressing on him. "This is where the signal came from. Let's move out." As they approached the entrance, an overwhelming sense of foreboding washed over them. The grand archway leading into the city was adorned with intricate carvings, symbols none of them could recognize, but there was an undeniable familiarity to them. It was as if they had seen these markings before in their studies of ancient galactic texts, but they couldn't place where. The air was thick with the smell of decay and age. The team's footfalls echoed ominously through the empty streets as they ventured deeper into the heart of the city. Massive stone structures loomed overhead, their surfaces covered in strange symbols and patterns. Vos's crew, a mix of soldiers, historians, and scientists, fanned out to explore. The further they ventured, the more surreal it became. The city was too advanced for its apparent age. Buildings were constructed with materials that shouldn't have survived for millennia, yet they stood almost untouched by time. Suddenly, they came upon a vast plaza, at the center of which was a colossal stone circle, its edges lined with sharp, angular carvings. In the center, there was a massive stone pedestal, covered in moss, and weathered by centuries of neglect. Something about it seemed important, as if it had once held great significance. The pedestal's surface was smooth, as though worn down by an unseen force, but as they approached, the stone seemed to hum with an energy they couldn't explain. "What is this?" Dr. Marisol Reyes, the lead archaeologist, asked as she moved closer to the pedestal. She reached out to touch the surface, her fingers brushing against the cold stone. The moment her hand made contact, a low hum reverberated through the air, followed by a soft click. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and the entire plaza seemed to shift. Vos's instincts kicked in. "Get back," he shouted, grabbing Dr. Reyes by the arm and yanking her away from the pedestal. But it was too late. The ground beneath them began to crack open, and massive doors, hidden beneath the stone for untold centuries, slowly began to rise. They were descending into darkness. The team watched, stunned, as the doors groaned open with a deafening screech. Behind them, an entrance to an underground chamber yawned wide, leading into the depths of the forgotten city. A rush of cold air burst from the newly revealed passage, carrying with it a strange metallic scent, as if the very walls of the ancient structure had been alive with energy. As the doors opened fully, a dim, unnatural light flickered within the depths. Vos turned to his crew, his voice steady but urgent. "We go in. Prepare yourselves." They stepped forward, one by one, the echoes of their footsteps swallowed by the vast, silent darkness ahead. The ruins of the lost Citadel had just revealed its most guarded secret, but as they descended into the depths, Vos couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for them, something old, something powerful, something that had been waiting for millennia to be found. The descent into the hidden chamber was disorienting. The air grew colder, thick with an oppressive silence that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the team's steps. The walls of the corridor were smooth, and the faint hum of energy seemed to vibrate from deep within the stone itself. There was no sign of life, but the deeper they went, the more they sensed that they were entering a place that was not meant to be disturbed. After what felt like an eternity, they reached the heart of the chamber. A vast circular hall spread out before them, its center dominated by a massive pedestal, upon which rested an artifact unlike anything they had ever seen. It was an intricate structure of metal and crystal, glowing faintly with an ethereal light. The object was roughly the size of a human, but its design was otherworldly. Lines of energy pulsed through the metallic surface like veins, and the crystals at its core seemed to shimmer with an unnatural life of their own. Vos motioned for the team to halt. He couldn't shake the feeling that the artifact was watching them. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. He'd seen advanced technology before, human, alien, and everything in between, but this was something else entirely. "This is it," Dr. Reyes whispered in awe. She was the first to approach the pedestal, her eyes wide as she studied the artifact's design. "This is the key. I can feel it. Whatever this is, it's what we've been searching for." Vos took a cautious step forward, his hand resting on the hilt of his sidearm, though he had no real expectation of needing it. There was no telling what kind of security this place might have left behind. His instincts screamed that they were walking into a trap, but the pull of the artifact was undeniable. Reyes reached out to touch it, her fingers grazing the surface. The moment she made contact, the room seemed to shift. A low, resonating hum filled the air, and a brilliant light flashed from the core of the artifact, blinding them for a moment. Vos instinctively shielded his eyes, and when the light faded, everything was different. The chamber was still intact, but the atmosphere had changed. The walls now flickered with strange symbols, unfamiliar and disjointed. For a split second, Vos swore he saw the city outside, not in its ruined state, but thriving, alive and full of movement. The illusion lasted only a second before it vanished, leaving only a deep, unsettling silence in its wake. "What just happened?" Lieutenant Jensen asked, voice trembling. "Did anyone else see that?" Reyes stood frozen, her hand still hovering over the artifact. I don't know," she said, her voice distant. "It's like we just experienced something that happened long ago." Before anyone could respond, the ground beneath their feet rumbled again. The hum from the artifact intensified, and suddenly, a low voice echoed through the chamber, though no one was speaking. "Time is not what it seems," the voice intoned, distorted and far away. "All who seek the power of the timeline shall be bound by it. Proceed with caution." The words hung in the air, heavy with a sense of warning. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. Voss's mind raced. He had heard legends of ancient civilizations who attempted to manipulate time itself, to control the very fabric of existence. But this was no legend. This was real. "We need to be careful," Vos said, his voice tight with apprehension. "We've just awakened something much older and much more dangerous than we could have imagined." Reyes stepped back from the pedestal, her face pale. "I think it's more than just a relic. I think it's a key, an access point to something much bigger, something powerful." The crew stood still, each of them processing the enormity of what lay before them. They had uncovered something no one was meant to find, and the longer they lingered here, the more it seemed that they were being pulled into a web of fate far beyond their control. The hum from the artifact deepened, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop as a low tremor spread through the floor. Somewhere deep within the Citadel, something ancient and dangerous was waking, and the crew had just triggered the first shift in its long-forgotten timeline. The tremor in the floor intensified, and the air grew thick with a strange, electric charge. The low hum from the artifact reverberated through the entire chamber, the sound pulsing in their bones. Vos felt a rising sense of dread, but also something else, a primal instinct, as if the very walls of the Citadel were alive, aware of their presence. He motioned for the crew to fall back toward the entrance, but they were frozen, staring at the artifact, mesmerized by the soft glow that had begun to pulse in time with the hum. Dr. Reyes stepped forward, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and awe. "It's alive. It's reacting to us. I don't think it's just a machine. It's more like a living organism, or part of something much larger." Before anyone could respond, the entire chamber shifted again. The walls around them groaned, and massive metallic doors that had once seemed immovable began to slowly rise. A grinding sound echoed through the air, as if centuries of accumulated dust and decay were being swept away, revealing something hidden beneath. The team braced themselves, weapons drawn, as the door opened fully, revealing a vast hallway beyond. The hallway was lined with towering statues, their faces twisted in anguish or stoic resignation, but all were intricately carved, as if they were representations of beings that had transcended physical form. Their eyes, carved from precious stone, glowed faintly with a red light, their expressions shifting subtly with the movement of the crew, almost as if they were alive, watching, judging. "Captain," Lieutenant Jensen said, her voice a whisper, "this is something more than we thought. These beings, whoever they were, are still here. Their consciousness, it's trapped in the Citadel." Vos gripped his weapon tightly, his heart pounding. "Whatever they were, they've been gone for a long time. Stay focused. We need to find out what happened here and get out." But as they ventured further down the hallway, the oppressive feeling of being watched grew stronger. Each step seemed to amplify the strange sense of something, or someone, lurking just out of sight. The statue's eyes followed their every movement, their features seemingly shifting with each passing moment. At the end of the corridor, they found what they had been searching for, a massive chamber, its walls inscribed with the same alien symbols that had adorned the city above. In the center of the room stood a colossal control console, its surface covered with buttons, switches, and strange, glowing panels. The panels flickered as they approached, as if reacting to their presence. Voss stepped forward, his fingers hesitating over the controls. He could feel the weight of history in this room, the echoes of the empire that had once ruled this planet. The console seemed to pulse with an energy that beckoned him, drawing him in. He was about to reach for it when a voice, cold and disembodied, echoed through the chamber. "Stop." The voice was not human. It was deeper, ancient, and carried with it a sense of authority that made the air grow thick and heavy. Vos froze, his hand still hovering over the console. The voice, though faint, was unmistakably clear. It was as if the very walls of the Citadel were speaking to them. "Why do you seek to awaken what was never meant to rise again?" The voice intoned, its tone both threatening and sorrowful. "Do you not understand the cost of what you have done?" The crew exchanged uneasy glances. The weight of the words hung in the air, the gravity of their situation becoming clearer with each passing second. Dr. Reyes stepped forward cautiously, her voice trembling as she spoke. "Who, or what are you?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Then, the voice responded, but this time, it was more than just words. It was a flood of memories, fragments of an ancient civilization, of a powerful empire that had once ruled across the stars. The images flooded the minds of the crew, overwhelming them with visions of vast fleets, towering cities, and beings of unimaginable power. "We were the architects of time," the voice said, its tone now laced with a bitter regret. "We controlled the flow of reality itself, but in our arrogance, we shattered the fabric of time. And now, we are bound within it. You have awakened us, but you cannot undo what has been done." The team stood in stunned silence, the full weight of their discovery crashing down upon them. The very thing they had uncovered, the artifact, the Citadel, was more than just an ancient ruin. It was a prison for the rulers of an empire that had bent time to their will, and in doing so, they had doomed themselves. Voss's heart pounded in his chest as he realized the magnitude of the situation. They had triggered something far beyond their control, and the consequences of their actions were only just beginning to unfold. The voice's warning echoed in their minds, leaving a heavy silence in the chamber. Every crew member stood frozen, the realization of what they had uncovered settling over them like a dark cloud. They had not just stumbled upon a forgotten civilization. They had awakened something far more dangerous, something that had been sealed away for a reason. Vos took a slow breath, his mind racing. The weight of the voice's words hung in the air, their meaning slowly unraveling. The Empire, the architects of time, had tried to bend reality to their will, and in doing so, they had fractured it, and now they were bound within it, unable to escape. The console before him flickered again, the panels lighting up with a series of symbols. The air grew thick with energy, the hum from the artifact pulsing louder, a deep, resonant vibration that seemed to penetrate the walls of the Citadel itself. The room felt alive, as if the very structure of the place was responding to their presence. "Captain," Jensen said, her voice trembling, I think it's trying to communicate again." Before Voss could respond, the ground beneath their feet trembled violently. A low rumble grew louder, shaking the chamber with enough force to send the crew stumbling. The stone walls groaned, and the distant sound of something heavy scraping against the ground echoed through the hallways. A sudden, blinding flash of light erupted from the far end of the room, nearly blinding them. When the light faded, something was there, a figure, tall and cloaked in shadow, standing at the threshold of the chamber. At first, Voss thought it was a trick of the light, an illusion conjured by the strange energies of the Citadel. But as the figure stepped forward, it became all too clear that this was no illusion. The being was real. The figure was humanoid, its body covered in dark, sleek armor that shimmered like liquid metal. Its eyes glowed a menacing red, and its movements were unnaturally smooth, as though it were gliding rather than walking. A heavy silence settled over the room as the creature advanced, its presence oppressive, like a storm on the horizon. "Is it?" Dr. Reyes whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of awe and fear. "Alive?" The creature did not answer. Instead, it raised its hand, and with a single motion, a low, resonating hum filled the air. The temperature in the room dropped, and the light around them seemed to bend. It was as if the very fabric of reality was being twisted by its will. Voss's hand went instinctively to his sidearm. "Weapons ready," he ordered, his voice calm but firm. He had no idea what this creature was, but he knew it was a threat, and it wasn't alone. As if responding to his thoughts, the walls of the chamber began to shift. From the shadows, more figures began to emerge, cloaked in similar armor, their red eyes glowing with an eerie, unnatural light. The room quickly filled with them, each one moving with an unsettling precision, as if they were part of a larger, coordinated force. "They're not human," Jensen said, her voice barely audible. "What are they?" Voss's mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. "Whatever they are, they're not just here to observe. We've triggered something that's been waiting for centuries." The first figure raised its arm again, and the hum in the room grew louder. A crackling energy surged from the tips of its fingers, forming a swirling vortex of energy that crackled in the air like lightning. The figures around them seemed to draw strength from the vortex, their forms shimmering with dark energy. Voss didn't hesitate. "Move," he shouted. The crew scattered, taking cover behind the nearest structures. The first blast of energy erupted from the vortex, striking the ground with enough force to shake the chamber. The explosion sent stone fragments flying, and the team scrambled to avoid the falling debris. Voss's heart pounded in his chest as he scanned the room, trying to find a way to fight back. Whatever these beings were, they were beyond anything they had encountered. He motioned to his crew, signaling for them to fall back to the entrance. But the creatures were faster. They moved with inhuman speed, blocking their exit, cutting off any chance of escape. One of the armored beings raised its arm again, and the air around them crackled with dark energy. "Not yet," Voss muttered under his breath, his mind racing for a solution. He had no choice but to face them head-on. They had awakened the power of the Citadel, and now they would have to deal with its consequences. As the creatures closed in, the full weight of their arrival became clear. These were not just guardians, they were something far more dangerous. The first enemy they would face in the heart of the lost Citadel, and it was only the beginning. The air was thick with tension, the heavy hum of the creature's energy swirling through the chamber. Voss crouched behind a column, his pulse racing. His crew was scattered throughout the room, taking cover as the armored beings advanced with unnerving precision. Each step they took seemed to distort the space around them, as if reality itself was warping under their influence. "Captain, we need a plan," Lieutenant Jensen whispered through her comms. She was positioned at the far end of the chamber, her voice tinged with fear, but still steady. "We can't fight them like this." Voss scanned the room, his mind working rapidly. The creatures were too fast, too powerful. Their energy blasts had already left large craters in the stone walls, and the way they moved, coordinated, efficient, suggested that they were not just soldiers but something more, an entire force bound to the Citadel. Dr. Reyes's voice came through the comms, shaky but clear. "They're not attacking us directly. It's almost as if they're waiting for something." Voss's eyes narrowed. That was the key. The creatures weren't acting out of pure aggression. They were waiting for an order, or perhaps waiting for a signal. But who was controlling them, and why hadn't they attacked outright? Before he could formulate a plan, a sudden movement at the far side of the room caught his attention. One of the creatures raised its hand, and the rest of the armored figures froze. For a moment, everything stopped. Even the energy pulses seemed to fade. "Why are they stopping?" Jensen whispered, voice barely audible. Voss's instincts flared, and he stepped out from his cover, moving cautiously toward the center of the chamber. Something was wrong. The creatures weren't just waiting, they were being controlled. The question was by whom? And then, a voice, familiar, but distorted, cut through the air, the words vibrating through the chamber like a shockwave. "Enough." Voss turned toward the voice, his heart sinking as the source came into view. It was Dr. Marisol Reyes, standing at the pedestal with her hand raised. Her eyes glowed with the same eerie red light that now emanated from the creatures. She was no longer the woman he had known. She was different, changed. "Marisol, what are you doing?" Voss demanded, his voice low but sharp. Reyes didn't answer immediately. Instead, she smiled, a cold, almost sadistic smile that sent a chill down Voss's spine. "You don't understand, do you, Captain? You never did. This power, it was never meant for you. I've waited too long for this moment." Jensen cursed under her breath. She's one of them." Reyes raised her hand, and the creatures shifted in unison, their glowing red eyes locking onto Voss and his team. The air in the chamber grew heavier as the temperature plummeted. The entire room seemed to darken, the walls twisting in on themselves as if the very foundation of reality was bending to Reyes's will. Voss stepped back, disbelief clouding his judgment. "Marisol, stop. This isn't you." But Reyes's expression was devoid of the humanity he had once known in her. "It's always been me, Captain. From the moment we uncovered this place, I knew what was at stake. You never understood the true potential of the artifact. The timeline, the power to reshape the past, the future. I was chosen, not you." A wave of energy surged from her, rippling through the room. The creatures stood motionless, waiting for her command, and the crackling energy around her intensified. Voss's mind raced. How had she fallen under the influence of the artifact? She had always been driven by curiosity, but this was something darker, something far more insidious. "You've been deceived, Marisol," Voss said, his voice hardening. "This place isn't a gift, it's a curse. The empire that built it destroyed themselves. Do you think they had the right to control time, to play with the very fabric of reality?" Reyes didn't flinch. Instead, she laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. "You still don't get it, do you? The timeline can be rewritten. The mistakes of the past can be undone. And She raised her hand once more, and the creatures took a step forward, their glowing eyes narrowing in on Voss and his team. "I will make sure of it." The room exploded into chaos as the first of the creatures lunged toward them, its energy weapons crackling to life. Voss barely had time to react before the air around him was filled with blinding light and deafening sounds of battle. But even as the battle raged around him, Voss's thoughts remained focused on Reyes. She had betrayed them all. The woman he had trusted, the one who had been by his side in every mission. Now she was their enemy, and it was clear she wasn't just fighting for control of the Citadel. She was fighting for control of time itself. The battle erupted around them in a chaotic blur of energy blasts and crackling power. Vos had barely enough time to react before the first of the armored creatures charged, its weapon aimed directly at him. He ducked behind a fallen column as the blast narrowly missed, sending shards of stone scattering in all directions. The hum of energy from the creatures filled the room, growing louder as they advanced with terrifying precision. Each of their strikes seemed designed to overwhelm, their attacks perfectly synchronized. The air vibrated with the force of the energy weapons, but even in the midst of this storm, Vos's focus never wavered from Dr. Reyes, standing at the heart of the chaos, her eyes burning with the same crimson light as the creatures. "Reyes!" Vos shouted over the din of the battle, his voice cutting through the crackling of weapons and the whistling of laser fire. "This isn't you. You're being manipulated." But Reyes only turned her cold, emotionless gaze toward him, the faintest flicker of something that could have been pity crossing her face. "You're too weak to understand, Captain. Time isn't a force to be feared. It's a weapon to be wielded. You'll see that soon enough." As if on cue, the creatures closed in, blocking any escape. Vos felt the pressure mounting. His crew was pinned down, and their weapons, though advanced, seemed to have little effect on the armored beings. Each shot that struck them only seemed to make them more dangerous, more relentless. He needed to do something, anything, to break the deadlock. "Jensen, Reyes is the key. We need to get to her," Vos yelled, signaling for his team to rally. He knew they couldn't keep up this fight much longer. Their only chance was to break Reyes's control over the creatures and shut down the artifact. Jensen nodded, her face streaked with sweat and dirt. She was an excellent soldier, always steady under pressure, but even she couldn't hide the fear in her eyes as she fired at one of the creatures, her shots bouncing harmlessly off its armor. "How the hell do we get through that?" she muttered. Vos didn't answer immediately. Instead, he scanned the room, searching for anything they could use to their advantage. Then, something caught his eye, a small forgotten control panel, hidden beneath the shadow of a towering statue. It was old, the buttons and levers worn, but it was their only hope. "Cover me," he ordered, and without waiting for a response, he sprinted toward the panel, narrowly dodging another blast of energy from one of the creatures. His heart raced as he reached the panel and slammed his fist against it, activating the archaic system. For a moment, nothing happened, but then the walls of the Citadel began to groan, a deep, resonating sound that shook the ground beneath his feet. The energy in the room fluctuated, the pulsing light from the artifact dimming slightly. Reyes's eyes widened in surprise, and for the first time, her expression faltered. "No," she hissed. "You don't understand." The ground beneath them shook violently, and the air itself seemed to ripple with power. A force, unseen but felt by all, surged through the chamber. The armored creatures froze, their movements stuttering as the energy they had been channeling faltered. Vos didn't waste the opportunity. "Now," he shouted, rallying his crew. Jensen and the others broke cover, charging forward with renewed determination. Vos led the charge, his weapon raised, but his eyes fixed on Reyes. The artifact's power was waning, but the moment was fleeting. They had to act fast. Reyes turned toward them, her face twisting with fury. "You can't stop me," she screamed, raising her hands to unleash another wave of energy. But before she could strike, the control panel activated fully, and a series of loud mechanical clicks echoed through the room. The ground beneath them trembled again, but this time, the shaking was not violent. It was precise, controlled, like the machinery of the Citadel was realigning itself, forcing the artifact into submission. Reyes's outstretched hands faltered, and the creatures that had once obeyed her command now hesitated, their eyes flickering. For a split second, the hold she had over them weakened. Vos didn't hesitate. he dove for Reyes, grabbing her by the shoulders and slamming her against the pedestal, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "This ends now, Marisol," he snarled, his voice thick with regret and determination. Her eyes, still glowing with an unnatural light, filled with disbelief. "You don't understand. You've ruined everything." Voss tightened his grip. "No, you've ruined everything. The timeline isn't a toy. It's a force that can destroy everything you've ever known." There was a brief, tense silence as Reyes's resistance faded, her face collapsing into a look of sorrow. But then, she let out a bitter laugh. "It's too late, Captain. You think you've won. This Citadel, this empire, it's a part of something much larger. You've only scratched the surface." The hum of the artifact began to rise again, louder now, and the chamber shifted. Voss's grip tightened, but in that moment, he knew the fight wasn't over. The true danger was only just beginning. But this time, they would be ready, and they wouldn't let the Empire's legacy be its undoing. The chamber rumbled as the artifact's power surged again, its hum vibrating through the walls like a heartbeat. Voss could feel the energy in the air, thick and heavy, as if it were trying to tear reality itself apart. Dr. Reyes, no longer the woman he had known, was no longer a threat on her own. Her power had been broken, her control over the Citadel's guardians slipping away with every passing second. But even with her subdued, the Citadel itself still seemed alive, its ancient mechanisms awakening in a way that suggested a far greater danger. Voss stepped back from Reyes, who now slumped against the pedestal, her hands trembling as the last vestiges of her influence over the Citadel faded. She met his gaze, her eyes still glowing faintly, but there was no longer the fire of madness in them. Instead, there was emptiness, a hollow shell of the woman she had once been. You've destroyed everything," she whispered, her voice distant, almost resigned. "You've awakened something that should have remained buried." Voss didn't answer. There were no words that could undo what had been done. The Citadel, once a monument to an empire that had ruled the stars, was now a weapon poised to rip apart the very fabric of time. And the price of victory, of stopping Reyes, was more than he had ever anticipated. The hum from the artifact intensified, a sound that seemed to penetrate deep into his chest. He could feel the pull of it, like a dark gravitational force drawing everything toward it. It wasn't just a machine, it was a prison, a tomb, a weapon. The very heart of the Citadel had been its most dangerous secret. Time itself had been twisted and broken within its walls, and now it was threatening to collapse in on itself. "Captain," Jensen called out, her voice strained with urgency. "We've got to go. This place is coming apart." Voss nodded, his mind racing as the walls of the chamber began to crack, large fissures splitting the stone floor. The air grew even colder, and the lights flickered, casting long, distorted shadows across the room. The entire structure was buckling under the strain of the artifact's power. The Citadel was alive, but now it was dying. "We're not leaving yet," Voss said, his voice hard with resolve. He turned back to Reyes, who had slumped to her knees, her hands clutching her head, as if trying to block out the mounting chaos around her. "You can't stop it," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You can't stop time. It's too late." Voss ignored her. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him, the knowledge that their actions here would have consequences far beyond what they could foresee. He motioned to Jensen and the others. "Get to the ship. Now." They didn't need to be told twice. The team began to retreat toward the chamber's exit, but Voss hesitated, his eyes lingering on the artifact. It was still pulsing with energy, its glow brighter than ever before. If they left it unchecked, it would only continue to destabilize the timeline, tearing apart everything it touched. He could feel the weight of the crew's lives in that moment. Their only chance for survival was escape. But if he left, if he ran, the consequences could be catastrophic. He had no way of knowing just how far the effects of this ancient power could ripple through time. He turned back to Rias, his voice low. "This is the end, Marisol. We're ending this now." Her eyes locked onto his, her expression haunted. "You'll never understand," she said, a tear escaping down her cheek. "Time is a force that doesn't forgive. It has its own will." Voss didn't respond. He wasn't sure if he could. In that moment, he understood the truth of what she had done. She hadn't just tried to control the past, she had tried to bend it to her own will. And in doing so, she had unlocked something far more dangerous than either of them could have imagined. With one final glance at her, he turned and sprinted toward the exit. The ground beneath them shook violently, the Citadel's foundations cracking, threatening to collapse entirely. As he reached the threshold, he could see the sky above, a dark storm swirling with unnatural energy. The ship was waiting for them, its engines already roaring to life. But just as Voss reached the door, the entire chamber seemed to twist, as though reality itself was bending. The last thing he saw before the door slammed shut was the artifact, its power erupting in a blinding flash of light. Then, nothing. The crew sat in stunned silence aboard the ship as it lifted off, the Citadel fading into the distance. Voss's mind was clouded with the weight of their actions. The timeline had been altered, and the consequences were still unknown. Reyes's words echoed in his mind. Time has its own will. He glanced at the crew, Jensen, Dr. Reyes, and the others, all silent, the horror of their survival weighing on each of them. The victory had come at an enormous cost. They had stopped one threat, but in doing so, they had unleashed something far worse. The price of victory was yet to be fully realized, but one thing was certain: they had only just begun to understand the true power of the lost Citadel, and the consequences of awakening it.